Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us. We've got a really special guest on our program tonight, a friend, Saru Jayaraman, who has this incredible story of working in New York on 9/11 and how what happened that day changed her life and opened up this entire area of advocacy and has led her to found an organization called One Fair Wage, which has been working with the largest segment of employees in our country, restaurant workers, to ensure that they are able to earn that one fair wage, but also be treated with respect and dignity that they deserve. Now, I've been working with Saru now for a couple of years. We've done some work together here in Massachusetts and engaged with her advocacy down in Washington as well. But wanted to bring her on tonight to talk a little bit about what she's seeing across the restaurant industry and the food service industry, and with regards to those workers and those employees, folks that are living, many of whom on the federal minimum wage for tipped workers, which is $2.13 an hour, if you can believe it. And what that means as we're seeing massive layoffs across the country. But for folks that were barely scraping by to begin with and don't now have access to those tips that oftentimes fill that void in their pocketbooks and in their household budgets, and what this means for them. So I think you'll see she is a force of nature in her own right and an extraordinary advocate. And we are so blessed to have Sarah join us this evening. So Sarah, take it away. So Sarah, thank you so much for joining us. Just to start and give people a little bit of background, tell us a little bit about how you got into this advocacy and a little bit about One Fair Wage.
Sure. Sorry, Joe. I'm going to just, do you mind doing it again? Because I
Do it
realize
again.
I'm crooked. And I just want to make sure people aren't distracted by my crookedness.
You're good.
Okay.
You ready? Okay. Sarah, thank you so much for joining us. Why don't you just start just by telling people a little bit of how you got into this field of advocacy and a bit about One Fair Wage.
Sure. Thanks so much for having this conversation. We really appreciate it. I am a professor at the University of California, Berkeley. I teach public policy and social movements, but my main role in life is that I founded an organization after 9/11 together with the workers from Windows on the World, which was the restaurant at the top of the World Trade Center on that morning, which was, in some ways very eerily reminiscent of this moment. 73 workers died in the World Trade Center in a restaurant at the top of the World Trade Center called Windows on the World. And about 13,000 workers lost their jobs in the months and weeks following the tragedy. So we started as a relief center helping workers get back on their feet. But we were pretty quickly flooded with workers from all over New York City and then all over the country looking for help in the restaurant industry. And what we learned pretty quickly through that process was that the restaurant industry right now, right up until coronavirus hit and restaurants closed, we have been the #1 fastest growing private sector employer in the United States, almost 14 million workers. That's 1 in 10 American workers working in restaurants, but also the absolute lowest paying. And one of the main things we ended up fighting on in the years leading up to now has been what we call One Fair Wage. The fact that you've got the nation's largest and fastest growing industry with the absolute lowest paying jobs, largely because of a trade lobby called the National Restaurant Association, which we call it the other NRA. It represents the chains, the IHOPs, the Applebee's. And it turns out it's been around since emancipation of slavery, when it first demanded the right to hire newly freed slaves, not pay them anything, and have them live entirely on tips. And so that is where the idea of tips as wage replacement, tips instead of wages, comes from. Tips were never intended to be instead of wages. The origin of tips was feudal Europe, where aristocrats would give extra money to their workers, serfs and vassals, but always on top of a wage. When it came to the States, because of emancipation, it became a replacement for a wage, because they didn't want to pay Black workers at the time. And we went from $0 at emancipation to $2.13 an hour federally. And I believe you're around $4 or $5 in Massachusetts right now for tipped workers. Mostly female workforce. 70% of these workers are women, largely working at very casual restaurants, small restaurants, as servers and bartenders, struggling to make ends meet and suffering from the highest rates of sexual harassment of any industry. All of that was pre-coronavirus. We were fighting to have Massachusetts and the 43 states with a sub-minimum wage follow the lead of California and the 7 states that have gotten rid of this system, California, Oregon, Washington, Nevada, Minnesota, Montana, and Alaska, all require a full minimum wage with tips on top. And in those states, you see not only is small business growing faster, chains are growing faster, tipping is higher, and there's 1/2 the rate of sexual harassment in the industry and far less rates of poverty among restaurant workers. So we had a vision for how to do things differently. We had a pathway. It was like 7 states versus 43 states. And very sadly, what we're seeing now with the pandemic is that disparity between the states and the way these workers were paid has resulted in a pretty horrific experience for workers in the 43 states like Massachusetts that have had a sub-minimum wage compared to the workers in the 7 states that always paid their workers a full minimum wage with tips on top.
So just tell me a little bit more about that, Sarah. How is the virus then impacting those workers and those establishments? I mean, we're hearing a lot, and there's a lot of national news about just the devastation that we're seeing across the restaurant industry. Consumer spending has fallen through the floor. People aren't going out to eat. It's probably going to be a while before, even if you wanted to be able to go out to eat, you can go back into a restaurant. Many of those restaurants, the margins there for restaurants, for most of them, aren't huge, and they normally are based off of having pretty full occupancy in those restaurants. Social distancing, you're not going to be able to do that. So there's been an awful lot of attention put on the restaurant industry because in part it does employ so many people, but not quite as much focus on the workers other than saying, hey, how do we support folks that are unemployed? So just walk me through that a bit and spell it.
It's a pretty horrific situation. We estimate at least 10 million restaurant workers have lost their jobs. And our estimate nationally is that about 60 to 65% of them are being told that they're ineligible for unemployment insurance, at least state unemployment insurance. Now, some percentage of that 60 or 65% is, of course, immigrants, and not just undocumented immigrants, but documented immigrants who are saying, I could never apply for unemployment insurance because then I'd be seen as a public charge when I apply for residency or citizenship. So there is that. But that's actually a small percentage of the 65%. What we're seeing more so across the country, sadly, is that in many states, the workers are being told that their sub-minimum wage plus tips, particularly if they earn cash tips, is not enough to meet the minimum threshold to qualify for unemployment insurance in their state. So basically states are telling workers, because you were paid $2 or $3 an hour, which was not their fault, you didn't earn enough. And if you earn cash tips, you're screwed. You're screwed because most of that was not recorded. It's not the worker's fault. I mean, cash tips are very hard to record to begin with. Employers often don't report them. You're frozen. Are you still there? Okay. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, no, I was just listening to you.
You're screwed if you got cash tips. But even if you didn't get cash tips, if they were recorded, it's such a fluctuating income. If you earned a wage all of last year and unemployment insurance is measured on that, it's easier to calculate. If you earned a fluctuating income, especially imagine like blizzard times, cold times in Massachusetts, and even the weeks leading up to coronavirus, people weren't eating it out. Like if your unemployment insurance is that, we are just seeing people either being denied or getting a lot less than what they should because of the sub-minimum wage plus tips.
But run that one back for me for a quick second.
Sure.
Because as you said, most workers can't impact directly anyway, the minimum wage in their state. And so if you are at the federal minimum wage of $2.13 an hour, if you are a tips worker, and all of a sudden you have now lost your job, there are states out there that are saying you did not earn enough money to qualify for unemployment assistance.
We are hearing this from literally thousands and thousands of people. They're being told you're not meeting the minimum threshold. I had a woman from Michigan write in and say, I reported my tips religiously to the IRS because I believe in that. And they told me I didn't meet, because of the sub-minimum wage, which is $3.67 in Michigan, plus my tips. They told me I missed the minimum threshold by $171.
Remind me how states are able to pay for unemployment insurance. It's our tax dollars that go into that, right?
That's right. It's our tax. It's those same workers' tax dollars, and they're not getting it. And
They're
what's
paying taxes. They're paying taxes into a system that they are then told they earn too little to actually benefit from.
That's right. That's right. And is that we're hearing from workers, from those same workers that are getting denied. Well, the federal government said they created PUA, the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance, for workers like me who are getting denied by their states. Except they can't access that, they're saying, because when the state like marks you as denied, the state has to reverse that denial in order for you to access the federal. And so you have to fight and fight and fight and be on the phone for like literally, I've had people say they've called literally 2,000 times. People are spending 24 hours on the phone trying to get through to the unemployment insurance in their states. And that is why you are seeing the very long lines for soup kitchens or for food, because people literally have no way to eat. I had this heartbreaking story of a woman write in. I believe she was, if not Massachusetts, in Vermont. She said, we have no unemployment insurance. We were servers, no unemployment insurance, no income. I could go to the food bank, but I don't even have the money for gas to go to the food bank. And so I don't know what I am going to do to feed myself and my family. It is that dire. And I think it's finally people are understanding what we've been saying all along. We're not talking about a sliver of the economy that earned $2 and $3, no, or 4 or 5 in Massachusetts. We are talking about the state's largest and fastest growing industries. We're talking about the largest workforce of people. We're talking about 10 million people in America.
And as you pointed out to me in the past, Saru, the starting job for the vast majority of Americans anyway, right?
That's
I mean,
right.
you repeat the statistic about how many Americans at some point worked.
1 in 2, yes. 1 in 2 Americans have worked in the industry. Half of all college students, most young people. And the industry loves to say, oh, it's young people. It doesn't matter. They'll go on to do something better, which is always hilarious to me when an industry says everything else out there is better than us, which is not what these workers believe. Most of these workers take great pride in hospitality. It's funny, we've been approached by various entities now saying, do you want us to hire your people into these other fields, or we could train them in tech or cloud or whatever? And maybe that will work for some, but the truth is most of our folks want to work in hospitality. They take pride in it. It's not a default. It's something they feel very passionately about. They love to serve people, and they did a good job. Professionals, they should be treated and paid as the professionals they were. And now, not only were they not paid and treated as professionals, essentially they're being told by states, it looks to us like you didn't work at all. That's essentially when a state tells you earn too little to hit unemployment insurance, the state is essentially saying to you, it looks to us like you didn't work at all.
So you said a second ago, building off of the comments I made earlier, I was in Chelsea on Tuesday at the Chelsea Collaborative, helping to assist the distribution of food. I have lived in multiple developing countries over the course of my life. I've traveled to dozens of places in the developing world, from Southeast Asia to Sub-Saharan Africa to Central and South America, bunch of different spots. I have never seen as long a line for food as I did yesterday in Chelsea, Massachusetts. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people lined up for food. So when you tell your story, Saru, about a government, state or federal, not recognizing the dignity of the work that they performed in a service industry, in service to somebody else, that ends up by structure, if not by design, if not intent, right? Because these folks haven't done anything wrong. The structures here put them to a place, but they have now lined up down the block and around the corner and around the next corner and around the next corner and circling another block to line up for food. So what do we need to do to make sure that doesn't happen?
I mean, it's every time you hear these stories, it's so heartbreaking. And what's so heartbreaking is this is the United States of America in 2020, and supposedly we're the wealthiest nation on earth. And yet, I'm talking about just my population, which is 1/10 of the American workforce, but double or triple that when you think of other low wage workers, low wage professionals, because they're low wage and high skill. It's just, I think the pandemic hopefully has made painfully clear the things that needed to change, the things that never should have existed. So I just looked it up while we were talking. It's $4.95 in Massachusetts. That Massachusetts should not allow anybody to be paid $4.95 when they're working full time. It's just not acceptable to force these people to have lived on tips. And now the fact that they lived on tips is killing them. I call it living tip to mouth. You had tips to feed your kids one day, and then very next day when the restaurant is closed, you have absolutely nothing. And it looks like you didn't work if you got cash tips. So we should never have had that system to begin with. And the good news, the silver lining, is that it's not just us that's seeing it, and we really appreciate you lifting up the relief fund that we created for these workers. It's employers, it's consumers. People are really beginning to open their minds to the fact that this was a system that never should have existed in the first place, that this system was untenable, unreliable for workers and for employers, and unacceptable. And so we now have employers coming to us saying, these are employers who fought us in the past. Just today, I talked to 2 employers who fought us really hard in the past, who've come to us and said, you know what? You were right. Our business model's blown up anyway. We might as well try something totally different, and are now looking at implementing one fair wage in their restaurants going forward.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's amazing. And so what we're doing to take advantage of that, to help more employers move in that direction, we started something called High Road Kitchens. We launched it with Governor Newsom on Friday in California. We're hoping to work with the city council in Boston to do this in Boston. But basically, it's a program where we've raised both public and private dollars to provide cash grants to restaurants that commit to going to one fair wage starting next year, to rehire workers and repurpose themselves as community kitchens to feed unemployed people and provide meals to a bunch of other people, so that those lines around that you're seeing at the soup kitchen around Chelsea, we can reduce those by having lots of smaller restaurants be able to provide meals, free meals to people, and at the same time allow them to commit to moving to a better future, a better wage going forward. So we're launching the program, hoping to launch it in Boston, and have raised some funding to put towards it. And consumers in Boston can be a part of it. You can go to highroadkitchens.com and you can adopt a restaurant. You can enroll your favorite restaurant in this program. So it's a way for all of us to help encourage the industry in a better direction.
Fantastic. Saru, thank you. Thank you for your efforts, your advocacy. Thank you for just your tenaciousness, and for making sure that in the midst of this crisis, we are finding a better pathway forward through it. And we're going to elevate those voices and raise those faces of folks that have been serving our community, and to make themselves and make our society so essential, and that one day we'll actually treat them as such. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Well, I think you guys were able to see why I'm such a huge fan of Saru and One Fair Wage and all of the work that she does, and her effort to try to raise up those voices and ensure that we as a society treat people in our food service industry with the respect and dignity that they deserve. And her work to do exactly what Reverend Barbara and I tried to lay out a couple weeks ago about treating those essential workers as essential every single day going forward. That needs to be the silver lining come out of this crisis, and with champions like Saru, I have no doubt it will be. Thanks so much for tuning in, everybody. Have a great night.